Proportional Response. Book 1. Chapter 11. No accounting fee, no accounting for taste. Hannibal stood rooted to the floor and tried to appear calm. The last thing he needed was to get involved as an ancillary with a wife of a royal. That path is one which can lead to wealth and position, but it is also paved with daggers. His mind raced to find a way to extricate himself from the situation. Then the last of the Duke's wives, the white-haired one who had elbowed the man in the ribs earlier, gave a small laugh and stepped forward to shake his hand as she spoke.
My dear Hannibal, please excuse my sister-wife and my husband. They can both be quite boorish at times, particularly when they have someone high enough in the pecking order that they can push back. They mean nothing by it, rest assured.
She is good. Saw right through me. Not a lot of people can do that, all humility aside. High enough to push back. Am I really? He filed that thought away to chew on later. Well, they seem to expect me to, so here goes. He reached out and took the offered hand, turned it, and made a grand sweeping gesture. Hand out to the side, leg forward, and all of kissing her hand.
Ah, but with such beauty before me, how could I, a humble ambassador from common roots, not be set back a little?
He then straightened and gave her his best wink, the one he used to use on girls across the room to draw them into a dance. He heard Lady Ernor start, then giggle, and glanced over to see her hands blush. Her face spoke of mock fury, but her eyes danced with amusement. The woman before him, who hadn't let go of his hand yet, tossed that amazingly white hair over her shoulder, cocked a hip at him, and favored him with a tinkling laugh.
Clever, charming, and thinking on your feet. Yes, I can see why my sister-in-law favors you. I am Lady Golna Relor Felderin, quite charmed and thoroughly pleased to make your acquaintance.
The Duke stepped up beside her.
You can see why these beauties enchanted me so, I think, my good man.
He looked around the room at all of the people who had stepped off to give the ranking ambassador some distance as he met the royal personage.
And I thank you for keeping this gathering informal and unofficial. You set it up perfectly, I must admit. Now, I should introduce you to a couple of my other people. I believe you have met Binta Orkaran, head of my guard. I trust he was good to work with on the security arrangements. Oh, certainly, Your Grace. The man has behaved with courtesy and professionalism since he arrived last week. My head of security has only complained about him 2 or 3 times, which is a record low for her. But don't tell her I said that. She'll be afraid I think she's going soft.
The Duke grinned, but Binta answered.
She hasn't been as bad as all that, truly. I've had to work with security types who truly felt encroached upon, but she seemed to understand and, despite her token complaints, took it all with plum. I am glad I got to speak to you now, though. I wanted to let you know that the rest of my guards arrived with the Duke. There are 8 of us, 7 you will know with your badges. The others are silent, of course.
Hannibal nodded.
Of course.
8? Others? Oh, they don't want to announce how many others. Hannibal felt his eyes go wide as Binta moved and a short, nondescript, youngish human in a business suit stepped up to shake hands. A human? In here now? How did I not notice him before? He must be part of the Duke's party, but you'd think I would have noticed him. I mean, the Duke's wives are striking, but... Hannibal ran a judicious eye over the man as they shook hands. Nondescript isn't the half of it. He couldn't pull off man in the background better if he tried. I bet he is an accountant. The Duke spoke.
This is John Smith.
Where have I heard that name before?
He is one of the 2 leaders of the accounting team I brought with me. The other head is less sociable than he is.
Less sociable?
And passionately hates gatherings of more than a handful of people, so I let her out of this. She'll be snagging your accountant soon, I'm sure.
Hannibal shook the man's hand and smiled. The human's lips turned up by the barest fraction, and he nodded, then stepped aside.
I am pleased to meet you, John Smith.
The man seemed slightly bemused about something, but he had no idea what.
I am quite curious how our Duke ended up with a human in his employ. Not that I think anything wrong with it. Mind you, I have had plenty of cause over the years to appreciate your kind. I do hope you find our embassy to your liking."
The man simply nodded and then turned his attention back to the rest of the room. "Chatty fellow," Lady Goldner spoke with a smile.
"Oh, don't mind him. He's hardly the social type either. You know how accountants can be."
Smith's eyes darted to her for the briefest moment. Was that a micro-expression of annoyance? He didn't have time to ponder as she continued.
"Now, Ambassador, I think we have monopolized enough of your time. The rest of our people would like to meet you as well, and we would like the chance to at least say hello to the rest of you. So, how about we all make the rounds and put our people at ease?"
She winked and held up her glass. Enable touched his to it, then they turned away from each other. It was like a dam broke, and people he didn't recognize began to close in. Then they looked at each other, stopped, and tried to pretend they hadn't all moved at once. He put on his best smile and moved to the first person he didn't recognize to introduce himself, while motioning for his chief secretary to join him. She was a good woman, excellent at tracking names and details. They'd worked out a system for times like these years ago. She had a small recording device in her brooch and would quietly follow him around. Later, she'd put names to pictures and pertinent details for him to go over as needed. He made the rounds slowly. They'd allotted plenty of time for this gathering. He kept one eye on the Duke and his wives, and the other on whoever happened to be in front of him. He found all of the Duke's people to be intelligent, and most of them to be personable, witty, and slightly impertinent, which led him to conclude that they had been hand-picked by the Duke himself. The Duke and his wives worked the room in a manner he had to admire. They went off in pairs, one of them with him, the other two together, and switched out occasionally. Each of them seemed to meet with every person at least twice, but never with the same pairing. And as the party wore on, he could hear them bringing up things the person they were talking to had said in a previous encounter. He decided to take a break from wandering the room and allow himself to take the temperature of the gathering as he watched them work. They all have a head for names and faces, wonder how much is trained and how much is natural. His wives all had split names, which means they were probably nobility before he married them. A royal with a plural marriage, and all of them nobles. This makes me terribly curious. I wonder how much of this I could get away with asking about. He harumphed at himself. I can almost hear the man laugh at me now, if I bring the questions up in too timid a fashion. Something tells me that there are very few questions he'd find impertinent. Against my better judgment, I like this Duke. He swirled his drink and watched the ebb and flow of the crowd, and was pleased to see that his people were mixing well with the group that the Duke had brought along. The man had increased the population of his embassy by almost a third, and left him with very few rooms for visiting dignitaries, but with as much as the man appeared to be involved in, he supposed he needed a lot of staff. The Duke had walked up to a trio of female interns, ones who had kept themselves nervously in a corner, and shied away from his attempts to approach. One of the Duke's people came over at a subtle signal from one of his wives, and said something which caused the Duke to roar with laughter, which somehow seemed to put them a little more at ease. Pathfinder who doesn't like to lead, huh? He seems to have a lot of followers for someone who... Wait, what is that man? Enibble drew in his breath to scream to the Duke, but could already tell he was too late. A man, whom he had assumed to be one of the Duke's staff, had been casually walking towards the drinks table when he pulled a knife and went for the Duke's back. Time stood still for an instant, as Enibble watched the knife creep towards the Duke's left heart, and an image of the Queen, blaming him for her brother's death, flashed in his mind. The human accountant's hand whipped out too fast for even his time-dilated eyes to track and latched onto the knife wielder's wrist, stopping the weapon a mere finger width from the Duke's heart. The assassin tried to pull back, tried to run, tried to turn the knife, but he was held as if in steel by the small human accountant. No, not small, short, or shortish for a human. Those are muscles budging under that suit, and I'd bet credits to Styx that the suit is designed to hide the man's true frame. Now that I think about it, that human has not been more than 5 feet from the Duke since he came in and startled me. I want to know the story behind that man." All of this flashed through his mind in an instant as his shout died in his throat and time returned to normal. The Duke turned and saw the man struggling against the accountant's grip. The man snarled and tried to speak, but the accountant tightened his grip, and Annabel heard bones snap from all the way across the room. He rushed towards them while others tried to back away from the scene. The Duke took one look at the man, now howling in pain from a broken wrist, balled up a fist, and punched him square in the nose. He heard something crunch under the force of the blow. The would-be murderer went limp, and the accountant let him fall to the floor. Annabel hurried up to them and began to stammer out an apology, but the Duke waved him off.
"I assume you don't recognize this man?"
Annabel shook his head, stunned to silence by the Duke's casual attitude.
"See, that is why this is an ideal time. The trouble with bringing in all these people at once is that normally a stranger in these walls would be stopped and identified. Now though, I think he is one of yours, you think he is one of mine, and he waits for a chance to get close. You can tell your security chief to stand down as well. If this guy wasn't alone, he wouldn't have tried something so desperate. We were expecting an assassin to take advantage of this period to make an attempt, but I didn't really expect it at this party."
The accountant cleared his throat and quirked an eyebrow, to which the Duke sighed heavily.
Yes, John. It means I owe you 20 credits.